I was going to speak on three issues: on price, supply, regulation, and the issue of sustainability. But I think if I take a step back, because I heard John say about the good news and how things are looking positive. I've been in this business for more than 25 years. In this business, we are known as cash buyers, and the word cash buyers, thanks to the negative publicity out there, it equals some really bad guy who's out there paying cash, like a drug peddler or somebody. I mean, I don't think just calling yourself a cash buyer, rings good bells in the industry. But what people fail to understand is, as cash buyers, our job, we are not yard owners. Our job is to be the intermediaries. What it means is we provide end-to-end solutions for the industry. So when an owner has a vessel to sell, whichever part of the world this vessel is, our job is to buy it as is, where is, do the whole logistics, and then deliver it to the yard where it's supposed to go. If an owner wants a certain criteria of what we call dark green, light green, whichever version of it, that's our job, to work with all yards. Even though we are a very, very small players in Turkey, we will sell to Turkish yards. When China was working, we would sell to Chinese yards. So we are not, married to a specific yard or a specific country. I'm originally from India, so it seems like I'm biased towards India. I'm not. I'm biased towards the client, whatever they want, get it done. So I think people need to understand what the role of a cash buyer is. It's not just to just trade a vessel quickly and dump it somewhere. It isn't. It's really execute to deliver on what the sellers wish. Especially some of these complex deals in the offshore sector are really difficult. So having said that, let me focus a little bit on the price component, and this is how last year looked like. Last year was perhaps one of the most challenging years for us in the industry, and the reason it was because, as I said, we do a lot of as-is, where-is deliveries. Every year we do about 200 vessels. The maximum we have done is about 325, but on an average we buy and sell about 200 ships every year. And most of these, as I said, about 40 to 60%, depending on the timelines, we buy as is, where is. And so when COVID hit right after March, it was really a nightmare, because we had all these contracts to buy ships in various global ports, lockdowns and so forth. Fortunately, we overcame that issue. And if you look at my graph in terms of pricing, we really didn't know how we were going to price these units. The only reference point I had was what happened in 2008, when the market just went for about $800 per ton, and they just dropped down to about $200 per ton, almost in a matter of 3 weeks. And so as cash buyers, because we are traders, we take positions on ships. We are not brokers. And so it was a real scary moment. And for a while, we published this newsletter every week. We said, we can't even publish prices anymore, because these prices have no relevance. I don't know how to price a unit anymore. We don't know where the bottom is. So you see that April, pretty much, it was a classic, that lockdown period. There was all new buyings, purchases came to a standstill. And then, after this COVID situation last year, we heard things like W recovery, V-shaped, K-shaped, S-shaped, the Nike swoosh shaped. I mean, we have heard all kind of alphabets. And this is what we saw in 2020, pretty much a V-shaped. If you look at that pricing, and I've used Turkey as also on the bottom, of the Indian continent on the top, a quick math, starting from January of 2020 to January of this year, prices have moved up by about 20%. Let's say this graph shows about 15%. If you look from May onwards, the scrap prices went up by 40%. So that's huge. That's huge numbers in the ship recycling industry. Now the question becomes, with India, I think Rota mentioned earlier that we cannot compete with India The Indians say we cannot compete with the Bangladeshis. So, and one of the common myth, fortunately, it's not the case anymore. That was in the past was the reason Indians cannot compete with the Turkish is because the quality of ship recycling is poor, environmental laws are poor, salaries are cheaper. I don't think that argument is at all applicable. It never was. I've been saying it for more than 2 decades. It's really the end use of the product. The reason Bangladesh pays the highest is because, keep in mind, Bangladesh does not import iron ore. There is no induction furnace that's going to turn steel from iron ore. So they have to buy ships and they recycle these vessels. They have mini steel plants. They will import scrap, but not iron ore. So that's why the price tends to be quite inelastic in there. If I go to the next one, which quickly talks about supply, Craig, and here is the kind of ships that were recycled last year in the Indian subcontinent. And Rota mentioned again about cruise ships. There were a lot of offshore platforms and cruise ships that went into Turkey and some other vessels, but I just stayed with the 3 main categories, which is really the dry bulk, tankers, and containers. And if you see this, it's half of the ships that we recycled last year were dry bulk. But if you further look in this dry bulk, the majority were VLOCs. In fact, 28 VLOCs were recycled last year. I've never seen so many VLOCs recycled in 1 year. I think that's probably the record year. So that's the reason why, I mean, I'm talking about the number of units, but if you look at dead weight, this is going to be even higher in the dry bulk because of this VLOCs. And on the tanker, you see again is about 31%, and containers, as we all know, that container. I think I was just reading Lloyd's list. Was it earlier this week, saying, is it profiteering or is it profiting? I think that was the headline in the container segment. And it was very interesting because we had containers, especially Panamax containers, which we had bought from various owners. And I think we pretty much sold all of those for the trading buyers, just because the market just took off. And or to establish names in the industry. So last year, when the market took off in the containers, we flipped a lot of those vessels as well. I think this year, 2021, we do expect a lot more tankers to come into the market because there is a kind of an overhang in that sector. I'm not sure about the container industry, the box ships, how many will come in, but I think a dry bulk still continues. We started seeing a few more capes, but with this increase in Cape market, again, that's drying off very, very quickly. So what ships come in really depends on the freight market. So if the charter market is doing well, it's not as much age dependent, it's freight market dependent, the supply of vessels. Craig, if I go to the next one, please. I think the next slide is probably going to be talking about regulation. I don't want to spend much time on it because I think Satori's talked about it and others spoke, but I think the main issue to me is, to some extent we spoke, is the Hong Kong versus EU ship recycling regulation, because these are the 2 key regulations that affect ship recycling. Basel was never designed for ship recycling. The EU waste regulation still applies. It's still creating a problem for a lot of owners. And I think that's a terrible regulation, to be blunt about it. And the reason it's terrible is because you take a ship, you have to do this advanced written concept, meaning the whole paperwork takes from 30 to 60 days. So you have a ship that is waiting 30 to 60 days while you fill up a bunch of forms. You're not adding real value. You're not making the industry any greener, nothing. It's just waiting for the bureaucrats to do what they're supposed to do. And on worse, depending on the political pressure or legal pressure, and suddenly the regulator will come back and say, okay, we approve, but you need to give us a cash guarantee of $2 million. I know of an offshore project, there are 3 offshore rigs, and the authorities are saying we need £2 million guarantee, even though rigs are going to Turkey. So £6 million is just a guarantee so that you actually deliver the vessel to Turkey, finish recycling the way you're supposed to recycling, then it come back, prove that you recycle this unit the way you were supposed to, and then we release your money back. So not only you lose 50% of your asset value, then you have to go through all these hoops. Now you understand why you read in the press some of the owners who just said, I want to make this go away, because that's not regulation. It doesn't help anyone. If you are helping someone, I can appreciate that. But if you're just doing it for the paperwork, I think it's silly regulation. EU shipper recycling regulation, yes, the thought process was good, but as always, the political issues take over. I know when this regulation was coming into effect, I was flying with Dr. Michaelis, speaking to regulators, but obviously our voices, we were taken as biased people, and so and there was a powerful voices that took the regulation the way it is. What we have found, okay, this is 2013, almost 7 years later. If we go to the next slide, is to see how many yards are approved today, you know, and this issue of capacity. So we have about 9 yards that have been approved. And out of this is really the Turkish yards. I don't think US is really a competitor that are EU approved. India is 0, even though there are 20 applications, and China 4, even 0 approved. So clearly that's not enough capacity to recycle ships in EU. If we go to the next one, and I want to actually show it, compare it with the HKC. Actually, if I can go, Craig, to the next one, because I think the order is misplaced. There you go. If you look at, these are the HKC compliant yards, where you have 109. So you have a 10x multiplier for yards that are compliant to Hong Kong Convention. Now we can enter a whole debate which regulation is better than the other. I mean, to all honesty, I respect the Japanese a lot. In fact, we had at GMS, we did a webinar, I think in December, and we had Norway and Japan, and we actually took out ads saying thanking both countries, because these two countries took strong leadership to progress ship recycling. So, you know, John, why so much progress has been made, if I have to give credit to one country, is Japan. Number 2, it would be Norway. Had it not been for Japan and Norway to show that, because first they had to show what are the guidelines. So Hong Kong Convention really came up with guidelines that improved the industry, you know, made sense. The Japanese came together, the ship owners together with Class NK, and they said, we want to comply a bit better, greener standards, safer standards. Class NK never did, no class society ever approved yards before. I guess Krieg had approved, but not as a class society. And they started renting these yards, the first 4 yards in India. I mean, that was the starting point. The Japanese would sell only to these 4 yards, and pretty soon the Indians started saying, wow, green pays, you know. So when you say green pays, it pays to be green, suddenly the whole industry starts turning. And the Bangladeshis were still very leery of this. They thought it's a short-term phenomena, it's not going to change. But when they realized, so 1 yard decided to jump in, and Class NK, in spite of all the political pressure, you know, went and approved this yard. Craig, if you don't mind, we just go back to show you the number of the class societies. So here are the class societies that have now approved these yards. So you have IRS, the Indian Register of Shipping. LR has also now Lloyd's Register approved 18 yards. RENA with 72, and Class NK with 39. I have used the term SOC. Is, if you those of you who don't understand what SOC is, it's statement of compliance. It's basically when the class goes to the yards and says, okay, you do comply with the standards of the Hong Kong Convention. So if you can move back now to the final slide, Craig, I think is the next one. Yeah. So now this comes to, I guess that I assume a lot of questions come in. What is green recycling? What is sustainable ship recycling. I think the whole term sustainable makes a lot more sense. I heard this term way about, I think Satiris mentioned about circular economy. And in essence, ship recycling is perhaps the best way for this whole shipping industry, not best, one of the good ways to go green. We are talking about fuels, the future of fuels, of design, and all that stuff. What happens to obsolete technology? I went back and said 28 VLOCs. We know the incidents that happen with these VLOCs, loss of life, 2 VLOCs, not one, that have gone down. Is this the industry we want? Do you want unsafe ships at sea? Now, if the scrap value, the residual value, I don't know if you guys did a quick math. I gave you the price per ton. Tomorrow there will be 2 VLOCs for sale. The price of a VLOC today for scrap is $20 million. That's a big number. That's a strong incentive for an owner to sell. 48 hours ago, I made an offer on a Cape. It was for a HKC compliant yard. And the owner sold it to a Chinese buyer who paid exactly the same price. In fact, he paid, I think, about $250,000 less than the scrap price. But he was taking delivery as is where is China, and paying for bunkers. So basically today, the scrap prices are in fact stronger than even second-hand prices. So I'm seeing Capes that are 2001, 2002 built, now starting to look at scrap, So what is sustainable recycling? Do we want unsafe ships to be out? Can we do it in a responsible way? I mean, what is responsible recycling? Is safety and safety of workers and environmentally responsible. I think Peter said this earlier that a lot of European yards thought, or some European yards thought maybe you can quickly build up capacity by start to do ship recycling. It isn't that easy. It is an industry. I remember about a year ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I was in Japan. I heard Martin Stopford speak at a conference and saying, I come to Japan, 2 decades ago, coming to Japan, there were the 3 Ds. The shipbuilding industry was dirty, dangerous, and depressing. And I was thinking there, I said, that's how we think about ship recycling, 3 Ds, dirty, dangerous, and depressing. It isn't. And those who have visited that, and now hundreds of them have visited, they find so much more progress has been made towards sustainable recycling. So I think the debate should be, and I'm glad, Krieg mentioned the same thing. There are good yards and bad yards everywhere, and I fully accept that. There are good yards. I've been all over the world myself. I've seen in the most developed countries bad yards, and I've seen great yards in Bangladesh. So I think this is what my view is. Just educate yourself, look at these yards, understand the process, and then take an educated call, not just something that you just hear in the media. Thank you, Craig.
Ilka. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Greg. Dr. Sharma brought it up briefly in his presentation regarding ship technology, obsolescence, and safety at sea. The question is targeted to Dr. Sharma or to Petter or anyone who wants to answer, but a lot of our discussions today focus on, obviously, emissions, new fuel rules, and ship owners' decisions to convert tonnage or perhaps purchase new tonnage as a more economical effect. I wanted to know from your perspective, looking at the next decade, can you put in some kind of metrics or perspective, what you expect to see? How far, how fast will these new emission and fuel rules drive ship scrapping, ship recycling?
We start with Dr. Sharma there, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not fully qualified to answer that, but I can speak from experience, as I said earlier, because over the years that I've been doing this, obviously one of the drivers has been change in technology. And I remember when ballast water treatment systems came in and double hull tankers came in, and there was all these timelines and deadlines in which the owners had to comply. What happens is when, like now we had this fuel regulations, owners have sufficient time to comply with these regulations, with this technology. So technologies, at least in shipping, in ships, if you compare a ship to a car, it's two different things. A BMW of 10 years old and of today is totally different, whereas a ship of 10 years old and today may not be. It's maybe only slightly different. So when these technologies come in, our job is to look at issues of capacity and residual values. I mean, I've always been a very strong proponent of adding value, because when you create value in an asset class, the circular economy thing works. If the residual value of any asset is negative, it collapses. All these technologies, you just have a backlog, ships being abandoned. There is the circular economy concept doesn't work. So I can only speak from that perspective. What happens to you? I go to a lot of these seminars. I'm privileged to be invited to like the global maritime forums where we have a lot of discussions about these emerging technologies. I'm not in the ship, the front end. I'm more in the back end. And so I think there's going to be, for me, it's always been the freight market, right? So as soon as the freight market goes down, I see a lot of ships. As soon as the freight markets come up, the ships that are supposed to go to scrap yards, as I gave the example of the container vessels, they start going back into the trade.
Dr. Sharma, are you coming across situations where you can't get the ships over to India or to Pakistan or to where they're being recycled?
No, we don't. Except for COVID situation, for example, Labuan, where there are that's a big layup facility in Malaysia. And we have some vessels there. We are supposed to take over some on next week, Tuesday, but Labuan just entered into a 2-week lockdown. So only except for because of lockdown, otherwise we can do it. There's enough capacity in these yards, so we don't have to lay them up at any place.
Good. Dr. Sharma, have you got anything to add in relation to that question about cruise ships?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it is a more complex because it's not as steel driven, it's more components. It also, the fact we haven't touched is the cruise ships, you do require, and I think, Gata can mention about this, the IHM becomes a very important component, because cruise ships with all these accommodations, you do the inventory of hazardous materials probably becomes a very important component. Those of us who have been in this industry long enough, it all started in India with this, I think the ship was called Blue-C, the first cruise ship, and it had about, if I'm not mistaken, 2,000 tons of asbestos on board, but that was many, many years ago. So you have to do a much more thorough job of maintaining an inventory of hazardous materials on these vessels, which normally it does. But as a result, for example, cruise ships are banned in Bangladesh because the Bangladesh government decided that they don't have the capabilities or the expertise to recycle the cruise ship safely from the hazardous materials perspective. So, but Indians can recycle it it's quite effectively. But I think most of the ships, because of the headline risk and the reputational risk, most of the cruise operators have been going pretty much to Turkey, and that's why we are seeing in all these newspapers, from the Wall Street journals to Bloomberg, has been front page news, the cruise industry, and showing all the ships being beached in Turkey. So Turkey has capacity issues. India does not. But yeah, we have to be more careful about this. And the Indians don't like recycling the ships during monsoon season because all this furniture that comes out. The interesting thing is, I know many years ago I sold a cruise ship, and basically the hotels will come in and buy the whole cruise ship, and you can have hotels in India that came off a cruise ship with all the furniture and all these things. So it has its own different kind of a market.
And Dr. Sharma, when you're looking at the yards in the Indian subcontinent, do you see a lot of third-party oversight of the facilities these days? So as much as the yards have got their certificate of compliance under the Hong Kong Convention, is there continual oversight of the facilities to ensure that they abide by the requirements that are expected of them?
Yes, it is. I had actually a slide that I was going to show, but then I thought I was supposed to have only 2 or 3 slides, so I didn't put it in there. I think there are at least about 10 or more independent these companies that go and audit this. Most of them are from Europe. We also have our own program because there are certain owners we realized who put this responsibility on us as cash buyers. So we call our it's SSORP, Sustainable Ship Recycling and Offshore Recycling Program. Yeah, I think that going back to the question that Richard asked about this change in yards, it comes down to this ESG, this term that we are all familiar with, and I think the measurement of good management is coming on these 3 grounds, right? Environmental, social, and governance. Because I've worked with these yards for a long time, is the next generation coming in, but also more importantly, we have to understand. When I used to talk to these yards all the time, I don't think people really want to create a yard where they are not taking care of their workers or dumping stuff into the sea. I think there's a general lack of awareness. And what Hong Kong Convention did is it created that. It created that awareness. This is what it is. And then when the Japanese started coming and started, quote unquote, paying for it because the Japanese were selling these ships 10% below the market, that was enough incentive for the yards to say, you know what, I'm getting a 10% break in the price, and in return, I have to do something which I should be doing anyway. So it was a win-win situation for all, and I think that's why it became, the adoption became so rapid. And then all the class societies came in, experts came in and said, this is how you operationalize the guidelines set by the Hong Kong Convention. So even though this is not into force yet, it's still, everybody's working as if it's enforced. It just lacks the legal muscle to it, but the practice is actually as if it's enforced. So I think that's what has made the big change, is the awareness, training, and all that stuff. We conduct ourselves, I think about every month, I think 6 or 10 training programs, all complimentary. We go to various yards. We have a whole team of about 8, 9 guys who do that all the time. And I think it's part of being that responsibility. I mean, we don't charge a single dime for it. If a yard wants to go green, our team goes and helps them with all the documentary work, again, for no charge. It's just because we want industry to make that leap forward, towards green responsible recycling.
Good. Thank you very much.